Hi, good evening.
Good evening, Rabbi.
Okay, here we go. So where are we here? We're doing Sif Dalid and Siman Reish Nun Bet. So it says over here like this: Katav Ran bePerek the Shabbat, Perek Kamal Shabbat. Says the Ran, Amatnitin the. Oh, should I post it on Facebook? Just give me a second. Okay. So we're starting Sif Dalid, as we said. So it says here, Katav Ran Perek Kamal Shabbat. Says the Ran in the first Perek of Shabbat. Amatnitin the Chulun Bet Hillel Baterin Im Shemesh. Right. So yeah. So we're talking here about this interesting concept on Shabbat, which is, we have a machloket between Bet Hillel and Bet Shammai, whether you're allowed to start a labor Erev Shabbat, and then it goes out by itself on Shabbat. So halacha is like Bet Hillel, who allows that. We've spoken about that several times already, if you remember, with your coffee and all this stuff. So all that concept comes from here. This is the source of all that. Coffee machines, timers and things like this, right? All these things. Anyway, so it says over here, המתניתין דחולון בית הלל מתנין עם שמסתברא לי דכל קצץ אף על פי שעשה הגוי מלאכה בשבת. So he says, it seems correct to me, he says, that not even, but if he made a set price, even though the goy did labor on Shabbat, they sell for a Jew, ללבוש שקלי בשבת עצמה, מותר לישראל ללבוש שקלי בשבת בעצמה. So the Jew can wear that clothing even though the goy laundered it on Shabbat. Why? Because when you make a set price, you're doing it really for yourself. What does that mean? The goy is doing it for himself. אבל בהגעה השרי, it says in this book, שם כתב לי נראה שאסור להלביש בגדים שנתנו לאומן בערב שבת. So he says, for me, it seems like it's forbidden to do this. So what does that mean, forbidden? It's forbidden to wear that outfit. And he did it on Shabbat. So what does that mean? He laundered it on Shabbat and gave it back to you on Shabbat. That's what he's talking about. So he disagrees with this opinion, right? The So on the one side we have the Ran, who allows this, and then we have the Hagata Sheri, who says no, shouldn't do it. That's what he says, and then goes on. It says Niagur, Katub B'Shem Shibur Leket, it says the name of this rabbi. Umori Yale Lo Svirale Hai Paska She Asur Lelovsho. So he says, my rabbi holds also it's forbidden. And that's what the Ram says also. So you see, we have several rabbis here, right, who don't allow this. So again, right, to reiterate, what are we talking about? This is a very specific case here, which is that you gave the clothing to the goy to launder Erev Shabbat, right before Shabbat, and he gave it back to you on Shabbat. So that means he definitely laundered it on Shabbat. So as we said, right, the first opinion allows, but then we have several other rabbis who don't allow this. So when Mordechai Pek Kama the Yom Tov Katab B'Shem Rav Tzemach Gaon, he writes the name of this rabbi, Chaluk Shetafru Goy or Beged Shetafru Goy Asur Litom Min HaGoy B'Yom Tov. So he says like this, right, that if a certain vestment, right, clothing, was made by a goy, and what does that mean? He did it on Yom Tov, and he gave it to the Jew on Yom Tov. He says, you're not allowed to wear that. So the Hachi Paskin and so per Makam de Nahagu. That's how we paskin Psachim Nun He Amud Bet. De'afilu bechol hamoed en mevin kelim mevin hamuman. So he says, even on Chol HaMoed, you're not allowed to bring, right, these clothing, right, from the launderer or the tailor, right? About the tailor, that's what he's talking about. אבל ודאי אם שיגר לו כלים תפורים שנגמרה מלאכתם בערב יום טוב. But he says, but if he sent him clothing, right, which was already done before Yom Tov, he just sent it to him on Yom Tov, right? Mekabel mimenu ad kan. Then you can accept it. So again, right, what are we talking about here? When it was definitely sewn on Yom Tov itself, you're not allowed to take it, according to this opinion. But if it was done before Yom Tov and he just sent it to you on Yom Tov, so then it's okay.
If you don't know for sure whether they sewed it on Yom Tov or not, can we assume that they didn't?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, in cases of doubt, we go lenient because this is all rabbinical, all this stuff. So here also it should be lenient, That's probably what it will be. So, anyway, let's move on. Also, this rabbi says, laws of Yom Tov. Right? So we have several books, right, that write this. So he says, since he says in the end, right, it says there that if he sent it to him, implies that if it wasn't finished yet, before Shabbat, before Yom Tov, even though right, the goy sent it to him, he didn't go to pick it up. From the house of the goy, asur, it's forbidden. So it's even regarding Chol HaMoed, lo amru ela en mevin kelim mevin ta'uman. They always said that we shouldn't bring them from the utensils from the house of the craftsman. Mashmalet din shigram. So he thinks that he assumes that the same also applies if he sent them Alman, his craftsman, he sent them over. Asur elav sham, you're not allowed to wear them. Even though in this parak, Mod Katan, Yud Gimel Amud Aleph, Share Le'avi Kelim Mevit Oman. He doesn't allow to actually to bring those utensils, right? The clothing on Chol HaMoed. If you're going to wear it for Chol, for Moed. Kvar Katav Bala Nimuk Yosef. So he said, Nimuk Yosef already wrote that what? The Tama Mishum De'afilu Lizvune Ve'shuka L'tzorech HaMoed Share. Right? You're allowed to even, right, buy it in the market, right, for the needs of the holiday. Even that you can do. ואם כן, בשבת ביום טוב ודלא שייך היי תמה, so he says, therefore, on Shabbat Yom Tov, that this reasoning doesn't apply, אין המה, דלא אסרינן להביא כלים מבית האומן. Alternatively, right, that we don't forbid to bring these utensils, right, these clothing we're talking about, from the tailor, בכל המועד, אלא אם נגמרה מלאכתן במועד, unless they actually did the work on חול המועד, right? The labor was actually finished at that time. אבל אם נגמרה מלאכתן קודם המועד, so he says, but if their labor was finished before the holiday, מותר להביאן, then you're allowed to bring it on the holiday. וכן יראה מדברי הרוקח, that's what seems to רוקח, כתב בסימן שין א', it's right over there in שין א', חלוק שתפרו גוי, that if the, as we said, the clothing, right, was woven by a goy, or min al v'sandal, or you have shoes, right, or sandals, and mekablin min a goy, we don't accept it from the goy, l'lavshan, ve'en l'lavshan, you shouldn't wear it. Ve'im lo yadua lo shenigmara melachtan, so it says, if he's not sure, right, that's your question, I guess, right? He's not sure when it was finished, right, before the holiday or during the holiday, Merev Yom Tov, right, the Tanan, we learn the Mishnah regarding that, and Revin Kelim Mebet HaUman, but we don't bring, right, the clothing from the craftsman, whatever, the utensils, then Molechin u'Meshninan Bechol Moed, Kol Shaken ve'Yom Tov. And we answer, right, in Chol Moed, all the more so Yom Tov. But if it was finished before Yom Tov, mutar lekablan. You're allowed to accept it. The lo gara midagim uperot. It's not any worse than fish or fruits. Shemutar lekablan. You're allowed to accept it as a gift. Adkan. Okay, that's the end of it. So let me just make sure here what he said, because im lo yadua. חלוק שתפרו גוי או מנער וסנדל, ואין מן הגוי ואין עליו שם אם לא ידוע. Okay, right. So the truth is that in this case, he's not really talking about your question. It's a little bit different. I thought he was, but actually he's not. Looking back at it now, I see, right? It's not talking about that. Anyway, let's move on. שנים בכל המועד, כל שכן ביום טוב. Okay. Ularan tzarich lomar the Tama, it says, according to Ran, you have to say the reason is then mevin eno lam mishum tircha. The reason we don't bring it is not because of exertion, shenat tzricha, that you don't need to make mishum hachi share letzorech hamoed, and therefore it's allowed when it comes to, because of that it's allowed when it comes to you need it for the holiday. Vehu adin nami de letzorech Shabbat b'yom tov share. Same thing also would apply, that for the needs of Shabbat and Yom Tov, it will be allowed. To bring those clothing from the tailor. We're not concerned about suspicion here. That's the thing, we're not concerned about suspicion. So people may say, oh, he probably finished it on on the holiday. The law is speaking to law, and he wasn't able to take it. And even if he finished it today, perhaps he made a set price. The goy ben the nafshekabi, then therefore the goy is doing it for himself. Okay. Interesting. Okay, we got a little bit more on this one. So it says the Bet Yosef comments on this. It says there's a little bit of a wonder here. Regarding that which you allowed this, because even if it's not muktzeh, in any case, litzar mishum de'en mevin kelim mebet ha'oman v'yom tov should be forbidden because we don't bring the clothing from the tailor on Yom Tov. Like we wrote close by. So it says maybe perhaps we can say that shoes are different. It's not the way for a person, for people, to give him labor to do, unless he's doing it for himself, and he sells it. So it says even if he made them Yom Tov, we don't care about it. Why? Because he's doing it for himself. Okay, so then he goes on, it says, says the Rokach, Sheim Natan Goy etzim lasot. If he gave wood to a goy to lasot lo keli, to make for him some kind of utensil, ve'asa keli, and he did made the utensil, or metaveh ve'asa beged, or he gave it to a tailor, right, to make clothing. Dino kemo oseh bemechubar. So it's considered to be like he's doing something which is attached to the ground. Therefore, if you're doing it within the town boundaries, it's forbidden. It's only allowed when he gives them leather to process, the kelim lechoves, or the utensils to the clothing to the launderer. It's not the beginning of the process. Also, if he gave the wood to the goy, or the sewing utensils, I'm sorry, not the sewing utensils, the tailor, right? Rather, he set a price to make for him keli mutar, to make keli for him mutar. It's allowed. When can dat Rambam? Rambam doesn't agree with that. Shared hitir beperek vav, because in perek vav, right, in halacha yud bet, he allowed lichtov lo sefer ularog lo beged. He allowed to write him a book or to weave clothing. V'chen katuv besefer atuma. That's what it says there also. So it says, it seems like all the poskim agree with this. That they didn't differentiate between one and the other. Says the Rokach, the Be'orot le'ovdan. So it says regarding the hides, to process them and things like this, you have to wait till the time that it takes to do the labor afterwards, after Shabbat. It says the Rabbi, there's no reason for this. Because there wasn't any sin done there. The poskim also seem to see like that. Okay, they didn't mention this. This thing. So he's the only one who mentioned it. Okay, great. So we're done with this bit, Yosef. Let's go to Shulchan Aruch. So if you don't mind, just give me a second. I have to get some water. So thirsty. Oh my God. Okay, so let's get started. Shulchan Aruch. So it says there like this: Kol shekatzatz afa pisha sheaseh ayno yudim melachat v'shabbat. Right. So, as we said, right, what are we talking about? That a person went right to some kind of a goy, right, launderer or tailor, whatever it is, and they set a price. We always set the price, right? In the modern world, that's always like that. You get your receipt, right? And the receipt has a price on it. So that's the way it is. So anyway, and he's telling the goy, right, do labor for me on Shabbat. So the classic case today is, you go to the dry cleaner, right, and you give it to him on Friday, right, 5 o'clock in the afternoon, right? So Shabbat is all coming in, and yeah, you're allowed to do that, and you're gonna go and pick it up on Monday, whatever it is, right? But here we're talking about a little bit different, which is what the goy is giving it back to you on Shabbat. So he did it for sure on Shabbat. That's the difference. So let's see, right? Wow, so there you go. So here he paskins like the Ran. He allows you to wear this thing, even though he gave it to you on Shabbat. So what allows that? So the whole mechanism is like this, right? Since he made a set price, he's doing it for himself. This is the heter. Great. So the Ramah brings the other opinion, right, that we saw. Right. So he says, right, some don't allow this to wear that, if you know that he did it on Shabbat. So he says, therefore, what you have to do is wait after Shabbat to wear that clothing, right, the time that it takes to do the labor also. So he says that's the custom, So it seems like the Ashkenazim are stringent about this, like the other opinion that we saw. It says unless you need to wear it on Shabbat, so then you can be lenient. Which makes sense, by the way. If you don't need it for Shabbat, why play around with it? Hey, what's the purpose of that? So it says if you can assume that it was finished on before Shabbat, then it's allowed. In other words, there's a chance that it was finished before Shabbat. There was enough time for him to do it. That's if the goy sent it to his house. But he says you're not allowed to pick up, though, right, on Shabbat and Yom Tov, the right, to go to the store, of the goy, right, and pick it up, or even his house. Even that you're not allowed to do. So on Chol HaMoed we do allow this, but not on Yom Tov and Shabbat. So then he says, "V'chol zeh bekelim she'asa Israel." All this is talking about utensils that were done for the Jew. אבל אינו יהודי שעושה מנהלים או מקח, right? But he says, on the other hand, if you have a goy, right, who's making just, products for himself to sell, מותר לישראל המכירו ללך ולקח ממנו. So the Jew can go and buy it from him, right, on Shabbat or Yom Tov. Obviously, he's not going to pay, right? He's going to without paying. ובלבד שלא יקצוץ עמו דמי המקח, right? But you shouldn't make, right, set the price, don't talk about the price. Great. Yeah, so I remember one time, there was this rabbi in the neighborhood here. He calls me up. He says, Rabbi, let me ask you a question. Are you allowed to send the goy, to buy merchandise for you in the store on Shabbat? I said, why send the goy? You can do it yourself. So he says, Rabbi, where is that written? So I said, it's in Shulchan Aruch. I was like, oh, okay. So I showed it to him, it's not this Shulchan Aruch. There's a different Shulchan Aruch. Anyway, the point is, right, that here also it's implied like that. But the point is, right, that you're allowed to buy merchandise, that you need for Shabbat on Shabbat from a goy, as long as you don't pay or don't mention a price. That's the rule. So that's what he's talking about here. So just to reiterate, right, what did we just say here? To recap. According to Shulchan Aruch, even though the goy did the job on Shabbat and he gave it to you on Shabbat, you're allowed to use it. Right? According to the other opinion, which is in the Ramah, no, you shouldn't use it, right? According to the other opinion, unless you really need it, right, for Shabbat, then you can use it. It's okay. So I'll review, right, this Ramah, because there's a lot of important points over here. That was the first thing he said. And then he said, according to this opinion, you'd have to wait till Shabbat goes out and to wait until the time of the labor is done. And then he goes on to say, but if you can assume, right, or at least, partially assume, right, doubtfully, something like that, right, doubt, that he could have done it before Shabbat, then it's okay. That's one thing. That's only if the goy sent it to his house, but he shouldn't go to the store and pick it up, right, or to his house to pick it up. But as we said, right, according to the first opinion, it's allowed in either case. In other words, there's no prohibition there. But on the other hand, right, we have to say probably that what he says over here about going to the place in order to pick it up, that could be even according to the first opinion. That you shouldn't go there, and therefore you should, let the goy bring it to you. So let me just see in the Mishnah Berurah here what he says about that. So he explains the reason for it, right? The Mishnah Berurah. He says that the reason is because people will suspect him that he did it on Shabbat, Umidat Yisrael, and the Jew, told him to do so. Vita, yeah, okay, that's it. Okay, great. So let's move on. And then it says the Ramah, just to reiterate, right, to review this, that's talking about kelim, right, things they did for the Jew. But if he just made it, to sell them, that's not a problem for the Jew to go and buy it, as we said, right, with all the conditions that we mentioned. No payment, no mention of price, right? I don't know if I mentioned this to you. I may have mentioned it, but I remember, one time I went out over here, to 108th Street, and I went into a certain store, a grocery store, whatever, fruit store, fruit and vegetable, whatever. So he tells me, the lady, the cashier, she tells me, she says, he says, you're one of those Jews, right? I says, let me ask you a question. She says, I want to ask you. I says, is a Jew allowed to come, right, to the store and take something on Shabbat, and not pay for it? So she asked me like that, says, what, he didn't pay? I said, no, he just takes it, doesn't pay doesn't come back to pay after Shabbat. So I said, no, I don't think so. I don't think that's allowed. It's Gezel. You know what I mean? So anyway, right, she was shocked, that they don't come back and pay. But in general, right, it's true that you're allowed to just go and, take something. If the store owner trusts you, and he knows you're going to pay him. So if he allows you, there's not really a problem to take something. Okay, great. So that's the story there. So let's move on. We got more time. Let's go to Hey. So it says like this, right? Mutar liftoach mayim legina, right? Unleniach kilo, yeah. So this is like one of the classic cases of what we're discussing. So let me go into the tour and read it in there. Right. So here it is. It says mutar liftoach mayim legina. As we said, right? What are you doing over here? You're opening up like a sprinkler system, to water your field. It's going like all Shabbat like that, right? To water the field. So in other words, the same concept as we mentioned, right? Which is that you're starting a labor before Shabbat and it goes by itself afterwards.
But you could have like the sprinklers on a timer as well, where it started and stopped.
Right, but in those days they didn't have timers,
Right.
So they would just let it go and on. It would just went all Shabbat. So we're not talking here, obviously, about watering your lawn. We're talking about grain field, right, which needs a lot of water.
But if something happened where, like, I don't know, the hose burst and it started putting out too much water, would they be able to turn it off to protect the fields?
Right. So you're asking me if you're allowed to stop the water.
Correct.
Yeah, I don't see any problem with that. Stopping the water. I don't see any prohibition with that. So it should be all right. Anyway, getting back to what we said, it just goes all Shabbat. Another thing is like similar. You're putting like some kind of a dressing, right, on your eye, A person, is injured with his eye, whatever it is, right? Even though you're not allowed to put it on Shabbat, because it's like, you're rubbing in the that dressing, right? About kilor rach v'tzalul, but he says if it's something which is soft, and clear, so more like a, lotion, right? Afilu b'Shabbat mutar, you're allowed to do it on Shabbat lenicha. Al gav ha'ayin, with on the eye. Mutar letet mugmar tachat hakelim, and also you're allowed to put, right, the incense under the clothing. And they just goes, right, and puts the scent into the clothing all the way through Shabbat. Kula Shabbat. So in other words, you see, right, same concept, which is that once you start before, whatever happens afterwards, it's not a problem because it already got started beforehand. Some people don't understand this concept, a little bit strange for them, whatever, but that's the way it is. Also, another thing, which is that you put barley, right, into your barrel to soak it, or to put coals into a utensil, and it just goes all right, burns all Shabbat to give you heat, right, whatever it is that you need. Even though you're using the utensil. So he says, right, because behold, that resting utensils is not from the Torah. The Torah doesn't require us to rest our utensils. Even though the Kli is doing a deed on Shabbat, the To'anin bekorot betabad or betagat. Another thing is that, we put like some weight, right, a mass on top of the olive press, right, or the wine press, right, and it just, the juice comes out all Shabbat. Same thing. בענבים התרסקו, right? מבעוד יום, וטוען עליהם להוציא מהם משקים, so the juice comes out all the way through, והשמן or the oil, whatever it is, right? והיין or the wine, ויוצא מהן מותר. So whatever comes out is allowed. You're allowed to use that stuff. You're allowed to drink it. Why is that? Because you started before Shabbat. V'chen boser umelilot, right? Also, same thing with boser melilot, which is types of fruits, unripe v'nishnita school, right? Which got mashed in Be'od Yom before the Shabbat. The Tanalen, and he put some mass on them, right, to get the juice out. Be'od Yom leotzi men mashkin, to bring out the juice. Mutarin, you're allowed to use that. Umashkin ayotzeim mehem, and right, also the juice that comes out of it you can use. But he says that's only when it was, well mashed. Shabbat, before Shabbat. So all they need now is the grinding process, whatever you call it. But if they weren't mashed well, they were just a little bit, right, little mashed. Asurin or mashkin. So then the juice is forbidden. That comes out of it. It says you're not allowed to put wheat inside the mill. That it should only grind during the day, not after Shabbat. Why? Because this is more like conspicuous, So therefore, it's like, you're disgracing Shabbat like that. So why is it more conspicuous? Probably because, it's noisy, it makes noise and stuff. So, it's very noticeable. It's very, right? So that's why the rabbis told you not to do it. Okay, great. So we'll stop there with the tour. Let's go back to, I read a lot. Let's go to Bet Yosef. So it says here, the source, right, for all this. Braita, it's Braita. Perkam the Shabbat, first perk of Shabbat, Yud Tet Amud Aleph. Otchin Maim Legina, right? You open the water to the garden, as we said, right? The water is the field all Shabbat. Umanichim kilo, right? Or we put the dressing on the eye, as we said, all those things. Kilo Alga Ba'ain Veisplanit Alga Be'amaka, or dressing on the wound, Erev Shabbat, right? Before Shabbat. Im Chashecha, right before sunset. Mitrapet Ve'olechet Kol Hayom Kulo. And then it heals him all the way through Shabbat. And not what you wrote, Rabbeinu, the tour, about kilo rach v'tzalul. But if it's something which is soft, right, and clear, afilu b'Shabbat mutar. It's even allowed on Shabbat. So he says he's going to explain a different chapter. So this kind of implies, right, that you're allowed to put lotion on Shabbat. But some poskim say it's only allowed for sick people, like it says over here, because he's sick. His eye is sick, whatever. Okay, anyway. But according to Magen Avraham, I've already posted about this many times, right? It seems like if it gets absorbed into the skin, it's okay. So that's how we paskin, in my humble opinion, but there are some rabbis who are stringent about that. They only allow for sick people. Okay, whatever, it's all good. Then he goes on, ומותר לתת מוגמר תחת הכלים. As we said, right, you're allowed to put the incense under the clothing. This is Gamze Bebraita, it's also in Braita there. נזכרת. מה שכתוב לתת שעורים בגיגית לסורן, לשוטן. And then we talked about soaking, right, the barley or in the barrel. הוא מדשארו בית הלל למתניתין לשרות כרשינים. So it says בית הלל, allows that, right, to soak all kinds of things like that on Shabbat. לתת כחלים בכלי, right, also to put coals into the utensil. הוקים שם בגמרא, since we qualified in Gemara, Yud Chet Amud Bet, leha, Tanya, that which we learned in the Braita, manichin mugmar tachat hakelim, that we put the incense under the clothing, v'chule, etc. LeBet Shammai de'itleu isur shevidat kelim. But it says, according to Bet Shammai, who holds that you have to let the clothing rest, utensils rest. בדמנחה מינה נשמע דלבית הלל דלת לו איסור שביתת כלים. So again, right, to recap, we're saying that according to Bet Shammai, they say it's prohibited, right, to work the utensils on Shabbat. So he says, we learn from there that according to Bet Hillel, that they don't hold that you have to let the utensils rest on Shabbat. So it's even allowed to put the coals into the utensil. And that which we said, right, that we hold that allowing the utensils to rest on Shabbat is not from the Torah. So he says not really precise what he said there. There's not even a rabbinic prohibition. That's what he says. So it says it's allowed lechatchila. But it says he's just using the style and language of the Gemara. That whatever was the case that was there. The Bet Hillel. You may have thought to say that Bet Hillel holds that also you have to let the things rest. They're right from the Torah. But Tuanin Bekorot Bet Abad, and that we said, right, that we can also put the weights, right, on the olive press, wine press, whatever it is. Mishnah Sham, it's the Mishnah over there, Yud Chet Amud Aleph, V'shavin elu ve'elu. So it says they both agree, right, Bet Hillel, Bet Shammai, Shetuanin Bekorot Bet Abad, that we're allowed to, right, put weights, as we said, right, to load on those beams, right, of the press. Uveigulei hagat, and also the wine press. The Gemara, Yud Tet Amud Aleph, right, it says in the Gemara there, Man Tana dechol midi de ate mimela shapir dame. Who's the Tana that says, right, everything which comes automatically is allowed? I'm Rabbi Yosef Bar Chanina. So he says, right, it's Rabbi Ishmael, it's Rabbi Ishmael. Because we learn in the Mishnah, Ashum be'aboser ve'amelilot, when you have garlic, right, or all kinds of unripe fruits, sheriskan, right, that were mashed before Shabbat. K'omar likach mashkeh hazav, man, take the juice that oozes out of it, the tabelbo to dip inside there. Rabbi Ishmael Omer Igmor Shitechashach. So he says you can finish it as Shabbat comes in at night. Rabbi Akiva Omer Lo Igmor. Rabbi Akiva knows you cannot finish it. Rabbi Elazar Amar Rabbi Eliezer says no, it's opinion Rabbi Eliezer. Then, as we learn in the Mishnah, Chalot Dabash Sheriskan Merev Shabbat. That these honeycombs, right, that he pressed, mashed them. Erev Shabbat. Rabbi Elazar, etc. Rabbi Elazar, my time lo amar Rabbi Yosef bar Chanina. Why didn't Rabbi Elazar say like this, Rabbi? Amar lach alab itmar. What you can tell you like this? Wasn't it said Allah regarding this? It's a long story here. I'm just checking how long it is. Okay, I doubt we'll finish it today, but we'll see. Don't think so.
We're here all week.
I'm sorry?
And so we'll be here all week.
Okay. That's good. Good sign. Okay. Yeah. There's time for everything. Yeah. So let's move on. So it says as we said, right? We can press on those things. So regarding that, right, says the Bet Yosef, Mishnah Sham, the Mishnah and Yud Chet Amud Aleph, Hashavin Elu, they both agreed. Bet Shammai Bet Hillel, Shetonim Bekorot Bet Abad, that you're allowed to press on those things, on those beams, right, from the press. So they both agree here. So who's the Tana that allows this, right? That whatever goes automatically is allowed. So we have several opinions, right? Who this Tana is. And then right. So again, right, we'll start from the place we stop. Rabbi Elazar Amar Rabbi Elazar here. Rabbi Elazar says Rabbi Elazar. The Tanan, as we said in the Mishnah, Chalot Debash, right? The honeycombs, they got squashed, whatever, right? Mashed. Merev Shabbat, before Shabbat, etc. But Rabbi Elazar, my Tama lo Amar Rabbi Yosef. So why didn't one rabbi say like the other? Why do they have different opinions about who this is? Amar Lacha Lab Itmar Allah. So he says, wasn't it said regarding that? Amar Rabba Bar Bachana, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. These rabbis said, we're talking about if they're lacking mashing. Then nobody argues, right? They're only arguing when they're lacking shchika, right? Which is like grinding. So he says these issues where we had in the Mishnah here, it's like they're lacking even basic mashing. So regarding that, Rabbi China rules like Rabbi Shmuel. Rashi says, right, you can finish it after he mashed them. So he gathers them up with this beam, and he places them in the utensils, and they come out by themselves. But you're not allowed to put it under, right, those beams, right, to squeeze out the juice. So one more time. Right, so I'll just finish here. Just going to finish the sentence here. It says you're not allowed to put them under the beam before Shabbat, that it should be finished when it gets dark. Okay, so I guess we'll stop here. We'll pick it up next time. Hashem, thanks for coming. Be blessed with wealth and health and happiness, and refuah shlema. And Bezat Hashem, we'll see you tomorrow.
Thank you so much,
All the best.
Rabbi.